This is where the bulls are kept. Well, it's not actually the bulls themselves, but this is the part that I'm interested in. It's semen from bulls located all around the world, and they're frozen in liquid nitrogen.
How do you know it's genetics that's helped you?
We monitor the amount of milk that the cows produce, we monitor the amount of food that they eat, and we have some very accurate information that indicate the differences between the two genetic lines.
And what results have you seen?
Well, there's no doubt that genetic improvement has given us more milk. In fact, we've got 20% more milk over the last 10 years, and I'm confident it'll rise to 40% in the next 10 years.
Now pause the tape and make a list of examples of where artificial selection has been used in agriculture and food production. Don't forget, it's not just animals that have been improved by artificial selection. Plants have too. Here are some examples. Crops, making disease-resistant varieties. Flowers with unusually large and colourful blooms. And tomatoes, which stay fresh longer. It was Charles Darwin who, by careful observation of the natural world and artificial selection, devised the theory of evolution. Evidence for Darwin's theory comes from way back in time, in the form of fossils. As you watch the next clip, make a note of each piece of evidence that supports Darwin's theory.
The theory of evolution is mainly the work of Charles Darwin, who published it in 1859. But why should we believe in evolution? Well, there's only one good reason to believe in anything, and that's evidence. And there's a massive amount of evidence for Darwin's theory of evolution. But it's not all direct evidence. You could hardly expect to have eyewitness evidence for something that happened so long ago. It's rather more like a detective coming upon the scene of a crime after a murder has been committed and working out how it must have happened, because all the clues are exactly the way you'd expect if that's the way it really did happen. But before we go into Darwin's theory itself, we need to be clear exactly what he was trying to do. He was trying to explain not just the origin of species, but also the fantastic variety of species that have ever existed on this earth. And that brings us to the first kind of evidence, the fossil evidence.
Fossils are the remains of prehistoric animals and plants preserved in the rock. Usually they're hard parts, like this shell. So the fossil record is actually the history of life on Earth. We can date all of the rocks in the Earth, and we find that the very oldest rocks contain the simplest fossils, about 3,500 million years ago. If we look at a specific example, this very old plant, more than 300 million years old, this is part of its bark. We don't find plants living like that today. This leaf from a flowering plant is found in rocks of about 50 million years ago. The earliest flowering plants don't go back any further in the fossil record. They only occur at that time, and they're the kind of plants we see around us today. So the fossils in the rocks actually record the changes that have happened to animals and plants through time. If we look at a sequence of fossils through time, we can see changes in features that have led from one animal group to another. This fossil is a reptile belonging to the group that we think mammals evolved from. This specimen is about 240 million years old. Here are the chewing teeth, and they're relatively simple. It also has a long stabbing tooth here and nipping tooth at the front. If we look at the modern tiger's teeth, we can see here that the chewing teeth have evolved into very strong prong-like structures for chewing meat and bone, as well as having the stabbing teeth and nipping teeth at the front of the mouth. So these gradual changes through time in the teeth and all the other features of the skull actually demonstrate to us that evolution has happened in the fossil record. And what Darwin did was actually find an explanation for how it happened.
Very briefly, here's how natural selection works. In every species, there's variations. Some individuals are big, some are small. Some are fast, some are slow. And some of that variation is inherited. So in every generation, most of the children will be born to those animals that have what it takes to survive and reproduce. And those children will tend to inherit what it takes. So as the generations go by, the average animal in the population gets a little bit better.
This theory of natural selection is vital to our understanding of evolution.
It may seem hard to believe that animals as complicated as these could evolve in the way that I've been saying. But that's because we're not very good at understanding the immensity of time that's been available for it all to happen. Domestic dogs and horses have evolved by artificial selection in a few hundred generations. But life has been going on this planet for about 4,000 million years, and that's plenty of time.
Every characteristic in a dog is controlled by a pair of genes, one from the mother and one from the father. Often the gene from both parents is the same. 2 genes for short hair will make a short-haired puppy, and 2 genes for long hair will make a long-haired puppy. There's no conflict. But when the genes are different, a system comes into play to work out whether the long or the short hair gene will set the hair length. Some genes are stronger than others. They're called dominant genes, and the weak ones are called recessive. Dominant genes tend to hide the effect of recessive genes, sometimes hiding them completely. So if the gene for long hair is completely dominant, a puppy will have long hair, whether it inherits the long hair gene from either one of its parents or from both. The only way it can have short hair is to inherit a short hair gene from its father and a short hair gene from its mother. This means that the effect of recessive genes is often covered up. But the recessive genes are still there, and they're passed on from one generation to the next. With genes for every characteristic of an animal, thousands of pairs of genes are matched up when a baby animal forms. The end result is a complex mix of characteristics from the mother and characteristics from the father. To complicate things further, very, very occasionally, the genetic machinery makes a mistake. A chemical mix-up creates a mutation, a new gene that never existed before. Sometimes a mutation is good for a species, but other times it creates problems.
As you've already seen, nature can go wrong. In the case of genetic inheritance, it's called mutation. A mutation can still carry evolution forward, and you'll need to know how this happens for the exam. Pause the tape to write down all you know about mutation. Mutation is a random mistake in the copying of DNA. If the changes make the organism more successful, then this change in DNA will drive evolution forward. What about our own evolution? Evidence shows that humans, monkeys and chimps gradually evolved from a common ancestor over the course of millions of years. One clue about this ancient relationship to chimps can be found in our DNA. How exactly does the DNA in our bodies show we're related to the chimps? Pause the tape and try to answer this question before watching the next clip.
When an animal reproduces, its DNA gets passed on to the next generation. That very DNA that made it successful at surviving and reproducing in the first place. Every now and again, rarely, there's a random mistake in the copying of DNA called a mutation. And mutation, together with the shuffling of DNA that happens in sexual reproduction, spreads the variation through the population. Now, if a variation is advantageous, say it gives a predator better eyesight or something, then that's the DNA that will go forward to the next generation. So it's changes in DNA that drive evolution forward. Now, if Darwin is right, and humans and chimpanzees are very close relatives, then we should expect to see that their DNA is very similar.
You can analyze the DNA from the cells of any organism. These cells could be extracted from animal blood or plant tissue or ground up centipedes. Mammoths have been extinct for thousands of years, but someone found a frozen one in Siberia. You could extract DNA from this and compare it to the DNA from elephant droppings. To analyze my own DNA, I would start with cells from the inside of my cheek.
Scientists can extract DNA from cells and then cut it up into fragments using special chemical techniques. When these fragments are separated, they can be used to work out the genetic code contained in the DNA. This means that the DNA from different species can be compared.
The order of these fragments of DNA correspond to the order of the different letters of the genetic code. It's much easier to analyze these results on the computer. The top line of letters here is what my own genetic code looks like, though it's only a small part of my DNA. We can compare this with the genetic code of a chimpanzee here along the bottom. The two sets of DNA are very similar. In fact, there's only one change here in the stretches of letters that we have here on the screen. If we looked at all my DNA, we would see that 98% of it is identical to that of a chimpanzee. This is very strong evidence that humans and chimpanzees have a common ancestor. The fossil record suggests that this common ancestor was alive 5 million years ago.
DNA can be extracted from the cells, analysed and compared. Comparison of human and chimpanzee DNA shows the two to be very similar, with 98% of it being identical.
If I'm doing some research for an interview and I'm going to interview somebody really quite important or quite scary, I try and reduce all the research onto a tiny bit of cardboard, a little bit of paper that I can carry with me. It's very comforting to have it on you. I used to do the same with biology textbooks. Reduce huge chapters of the textbook onto a little piece of card in lots of different coloured biros. Then things stand out, important points stand out, and it's much easier to remember.
Well, I've got a bit of a horror story that I'm going to share with you about my biology hire. Basically, there I was, sitting in the exam, looked at the first question, sort of didn't read it totally, but, thought I got the gist. Started writing screeds and screeds. Anyway, the mark I got wasn't as great as I thought, and I soon found out from my biology teacher it was because I'd written, about 3 pages all about fish when I should have been writing about birds.
Be on the lookout for biological ideas with a wider importance For instance, fermentation and yeast is all very well to understand it, but a good candidate will know its value to the brewing and baking industry. Enzymes have their role in living systems, but what about their role in washing powders? All these are important economic understandings that the good student will know about.
Try to divide your revision into bite-sized topics and have a rota of subjects. For example, the kidney in biology, light in physics, and the reactivity series in chemistry.
For making notes near the exam, write down just the main words. I found it difficult not to write down everything, but it just wastes time.
Hi, I'm Phil Jubitus, and if you're taking exams, remember, if you cheat, be discreet. What do you mean I can't say that?
Congratulations! You should now be feeling more confident about your knowledge of the biology element of your GCSE science syllabus. If you haven't found it already, here's a reminder of the web address for the GCSE Bitesize online site. And don't forget that the book will also provide you with revision exercises to do. Good luck in your exam.